Hello and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden, and today we're talking about Marvel Zombies Resurrection, number one. So, it's finally here. I teased this book like almost immediately at the start of this week, but it was at the back of the list, so it took us a little while to work our way towards it. For those that don't know, Marvel Zombies has been around for a very long time across like modern Marvel history. They've done a bunch of little series featuring these characters. The original run really featured the downfall of Earth and basically every major Marvel character being converted into a zombie. The Marvel zombies are a little distinct in that they aren't really slowed down at all. They maintain all their intelligence, which is somewhat unique and also allows them, especially the super powered ones, to really use their full abilities to devour and conquer. Uh, but Marvel Zombies Resurrection does feel like a bit of a new direction, and unless have like completely lost track of this franchise and I'm behind enough on these books, this appears to be a different Earth, um, which I actually like. The original Marvel Zombies, though it's fun, and I really like the moment when Quicksilver got infected. He basically just took over the Earth with this zombie virus, and after that, that world stood no chance realistically. This world seems to be a little bit different. The world is still conquered and devoured by zombies for the majority of it, but there are enough survivors that you can have a cast in this story of human characters, and it's them against like this horde. In that regard, this is a little bit more of a typical zombie narrative than other Marvel Zombies books I've read, but it's stronger because of that, and I quite liked this book on the whole. Earlier this week, we reviewed Deceased, and I talked a lot about that whole little mini franchise within DC and how that particular run has really kind of found a voice and a direction in and of itself after what started out as pretty okay to me. It was a cool way to kick things off and show the downfall of DC's world. But what I didn't know at the time was that it's like set up for bringing in all this new content that it's currently doing in its ongoing series. Um, and I feel as though Marvel Zombies Resurrection was published in response to the success of DC's. Essentially, Marvel going back and taking a second look at their own zombie franchise. In that regard, it also reads a little more like Deceased. This particular take on a Marvel Zombies world is a little bit more thought out and fleshed out, if you'll excuse the pun, but it's a more appealing narrative because of that. And because we have human characters, I quite liked it on the whole. That's mixed with good artwork that doesn't overplay its hand too much, but does feel like a proper zombie narrative with all the gore and guts one might expect out of that sort of thing. It strikes a good balance on the whole, featuring a fun amount of Marvel characters, but again, it doesn't tip its hand the way other Marvel zombie books kind of do. It's biding its time to focus a little more on telling a story, and I think it's that much stronger because of it. So yeah, a pretty great book overall, and one I think I would recommend. It's written by Philip Kennedy Johnson, art is by Leonard Kirk, who I quite like, coloring by Rachelle Rosenberg, and lettering by Travis Lanham. Overall, would probably recommend. I think I might like Deceased a little bit more, but this is also going for its own thing. It's much more of a typical zombie narrative of survivalism and that sort of thing, whereas Deceased is just like a very, very different sort of Justice League kind of story. Um, let's get into what the book's about with spoilers at this point, because we open on New York City and just an undead Galactus along with all these undead Marvel characters swarming the place. And Spider-Man, Mary Jane Watson, Valeria Richards, and Franklin Richards are all driving the Fantastic Car. It's pretty clear that Spider-Man has promised to keep Franklin and Val safe on behalf of the Fantastic Four, but the situation's pretty grim, and they get attacked by the Human Torch. We then flash forward quite some time. Mary Jane's gone, without us really knowing exactly what's happened yet, but you can only imagine. Tevye Smolka, Kay Garrick, Anthony Alvesdale, thanks for joining us. Spider-Man is awoken by Moonstone, Forge, and the two kids, the Richards children. They are clearly just some sort of surviving group of whatever's left, and they're trekking through the woods trying to find somewhere to go. Forge, after encountering a bit of zombie action and such, oh, I forgot, they're also joined by, I guess, Chewie, the crazy cat that's an alien. This is not really a cat. He's like their little scout and lookout, and it's quite a cute moment when he wipes out a bunch of zombies. They also have a reprogrammed Sentinel that Peter reprogrammed, and so it has like the personality of a nanny for the kids. Like, especially when I assume Franklin and Val were younger. So that's their weird little group. And Forge actually, supposedly he's leading them through the woods, but he actually takes them to the X Mansion. Tevye says, yeah, it's the cat. It's the cat from the Captain Marvel movie, which is a fun choice here, especially because, like, Carol's not around, and it's Moonstone, who I think is well written in the sense that, like, it's clearly that villain and that character who's just sort of here because where else is she going to go and what else is she going to do? So she might as well stick with them. They go to the mansion in spite of some serious concern and alarm, and they find all this stuff about like cultist writings. Apparently there was this group called the Deadheads that used to worship the zombies and would even bring them other people in exchange for not being eaten themselves. That's what I kind of get into, and like this world's a lot more thought out than past iterations of Marvel zombies that I've seen. They've clearly spent some time thinking about the history of this world and what like long term this place might look like and what things might happen in a world overcome with this pandemic that isn't just instantly wiped out by Quicksilver the way other stories have done so with Marvel zombies before. Debbie says Deadhead sounds like a cult. Oh, they are 100% referred to as such in this book. Poet Scotty says, where's Thanos at? This has his name all over it. Tevye says, I don't think Thanos can do this. Technically, although I don't know how, I think this is one of those things that's true, but they can't necessarily acknowledge this in canon all the time for legal reasons. I believe it's the Deadite curse as established in Ash versus Marvel Zombies. And that's how I like to think of it, because it does resemble that, like how the Deadites work. Maybe just slightly altered because it's in a different universe with the Marvel characters. That's how I like to think of it. Kay Carrick says, did they show Sabretooth? I don't believe so, but there's lots of little shots with random characters, and I could have missed it. Anyways, I was just making sure I got all of chat there. But the heroes, I guess we'll say. Oh, and Tevye also mentioned there's a great little moment with Cyclops' skull that they're using as like that Forge devised into a weapon to use his optic beams with. It's a fun little bit. Anyways, the heroes come across a bunch of surviving humans that have been corralled by the Deadheads. They let them go and kind of point them in the right direction to save themselves. A lady actually recognizes Peter as Spider-Man because he's wearing the outfit under his clothes. And she says some nice things to him. It's a really moving moment that brings Peter to tears that I truly appreciated. But the characters run into some armed individuals. And they are the Deadheads. I just wanted to make sure I had that right. It turns into a whole little thing, but then a zombified beast shows up and eats one of his Deadhead subordinates. And pretty soon, things turn pretty grim. Forge is cut in half. That's the only downside. Like, that Cyclops weapon is pretty cool, but they're going to cleave through characters because it is that kind of story. And I don't fault them for it. It's only 4 books. Tom Taylor does the same stuff with DCeased. That's the name of the game here. So things get a little out of control. um, but Beast ends up with his head decapitated. Franklin insists on talking to it, even though these zombies are also of a hive mind, which again does fit in with what we know about Deadites, and it will inform the others of where they are. But Franklin wants to talk about it because he mentions that his parents were on the Galactic's mission, which seems to have spawned all of this. I think there's a history there we'll learn about, and like I said, I don't think it really corresponds with the other Marvel Zombies books exactly, but I do think if there is a connection, it's through Galactus. Beast tells them that his parents are around, but presumably they are zombified, and they're with Galactus. Well, I only assume. They say, "He whose hunger cleanses all worlds," that I assume is Galactus. And Moonstone eventually gets fed up and blasts the head away. But she decides to leave because this hero gig was never her thing. I think she was just sticking around with them in an attempt to survive. But this whole idea of like going after their parents or doing anything like that, which admittedly Peter thinks is also insane. But Franklin and Val are convinced that they can like potentially try and find a cure or something like that, much to Peter's impatience and like deep fear of not being able to keep them alive anymore. It all feels very natural and organic to these characters. Oh, Robbie versus saying this is connected to the Marvel Zombies that came out last year. I had some sort of faint memory of that, but did not know that's where it's from. Thanks for sharing that. I had a feeling if there was a connection, it was something like that. It has to be some sort of multiverse hijinks because Spider-Man is very dead from the original Marvel Zombies books. But I think it's the right direction because focusing in on a living human Peter felt great. Oh, and then we do flashback, and it does confirm the Fantastic Four are very much dead. Forgot about that too. This is a pretty long book with a lot of stuff going on and people coming and going throughout time. So, anyhow, Peter wakes up, no one's around, and then he's knocked around by an explosion and finds an undead Moonstone standing over him and a smashed Sentinel Nanny, as they call her. But her head is taken off by none other than Blade. And that's the end of the first book. Debbie says, "Where is Mary Jane?" I assume she's dead. I assume that will be revealed in some sort of particularly emotional flashback. But if she's not with them, that has to be what had happened. Natalie is saying, "I love this issue." Yeah, it was a pretty strong thing. And then Debbie says, "The Daywalker shows up." I think that's cool. I think that fits in with a larger trend of Blade showing up in more books lately, clearly just as part of the announced news that he's going to be showing up in the MCU, which I am all for. Blade's a great character, and I particularly like the heavily movie-inspired version that they're featuring. So Marvel Zombies is pretty good. It's very, like, kill happy, and you're not really meant to be getting attached to characters like Moonstone and Forge, even Blade, I would assume. This is really a story about Franklin, Val, and Spider-Man, and it might not end happy for all three of those characters. This is a doomed world that seems to be heading right along the trajectory of the Marvel Zombies original universe. And I'm guessing this connection is all about them having that power cosmic and hopping worlds or something along those lines. Either way, Resurrection's a pretty solid read. It is a nice sort of clear response to DC's that maybe even took some lessons from DC's, but also is clearly telling its own story. And like I said, is focused more on a typical post-apocalyptic narrative, whereas right now DC's is pulling like World's End type content where the human race is like resettled another planet, is now revisiting the dead Earth and stuff. It's very different, these two series, and that's good because they both have value and reason to buy each individually, which I quite like. Seppi is saying, "Hey, maybe Kid Kaiju is alive too." Well, that depends on if Marvel's remembered that character and Jonathan even knows about him. I don't think we're getting that obscure. relatively speaking. I guess he's newer and a little more popular than some characters. I don't. We'll probably be focusing on like a character at a time in each of these books at most, and I'd be surprised about that. Robbie Verse was saying Blade was infected in the old Marvel Zombie series. I wouldn't be surprised if he can be in this one too. Yeah. Oh, I assume that's all on the table. There isn't any reason that all these other characters can't die too. They're saying, I wonder if Elsa Bloodstone is live. She shows up in a lot of stuff lately as well, and all those monster hunting characters do feel like they would have a bit of an advantage in all of this, though that added element of superpowered characters and even characters getting caught off guard in stupid ways like Forge was in this book. And I don't say that as a stupid moment. I just mean that in Forge did something stupid because he was upset at seeing his undead friend. It's probably happened a lot at this point where Forge has encountered dead X-Men, but all you need to do is hesitate or like get emotionally affected for 1 second, and Beast is fast. So I think that moment worked. It's not like, none of this is really Shakespeare. I don't even know if any of this really lives up to the level of content that DC's set for itself, but Marvel Zombies Resurrection does itself a huge favor by being very different than that story, and it's hard to compare the two even, which is good because, like I said, that gives each a reason to exist, and I think that's much better than Marvel Zombies just trying to do the exact same thing as DC's or anything like that. To be fair, Marvel Zombies came first. It just feels like that came and went, and now it's coming back just because DC's is a bit of a thing right now and is having all this success. But I don't fault Marvel for doing that. Both companies have done that to each other since time immemorial, and at least they're creative in their copying in this particular case, which is great. Natalie was saying this one is pretty good, so just pissed off what they did with Moonstone. Well, it's a sad moment. She was a cool character. She had an interesting like relationship, we'll say, or friendship with Peter, and it was sad what happened to her. It was a pretty shocking moment that they killed her off that quickly. But like I said, they're not really pulling punches in this book, and I expect a lot more sadness along the way. Like, that's why they're saving Mary Jane's fate for later, I'm sure. But that there's a certain emotional validity to this book that I think makes it all the more stronger because of stuff like that. Yeah. So the rest of the chat. Eric Jenkins says Spider-Man did whoop that zombie beast though. Oh yeah, there's a lot of good action and relatively clean little moments of fun throughout this book that I quite appreciate. Um, so it's good stuff for sure. So thanks everyone for joining me in chat. It was fun to talk a little bit about Marvel Zombies, but we'll have more comics coming out this week. Natalie's saying same with DC. It's a lot of stuff that makes no sense. Yeah, I mean these stories aren't really like meant to be picked apart like that either. I think that would be unfair. Um, if you're going to pick it apart, I think what to look for is more of the execution of artwork and content, as well as how the writing blends with the storytelling, the visual nature, where eye movements are taken, and in that regard, it's very competently made. Beyond that, I don't think the plot needs to be like incredibly clever or even like totally balanced in terms of uh like Natalie's saying just that it breaks its own comic rules. I don't know what you're referring to there. I think it definitely has its own internal logic. If you're looking for every character or like, no, I'm not really sure what you mean by that. But anyhow, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you guys next time here on Comic Island.